And welcome back into Live Now from Fox. We're keeping up with the verdict of the Karmelo Anthony trial that just wrapped up yesterday. This is where we want to continue the conversation about this trial. And this is where we want to bring in Mark Astor, our legal expert, as well onto this program. Back on here again. Mark, thank you as always for joining us. So with the sentencing coming down yesterday, can you walk us through a little bit about how that process goes? As we know that Karmelo Anthony was sentenced to 35 years in prison. This could have ranged from 5 years to 99 years. Can you tell us how we got to the 35-year mark, as well as that probation that he is eligible for after serving half of that sentence?
Yeah, so in Texas, when a defendant decides do they want a jury trial or non-jury trial, they're also deciding if we get to the guilt phase, the punishment phase, who's going to make that decision? Now, in Texas, they also decided that it's going to be the jury. So the jury heard the case, they made a finding of guilt, and then it was up to the jury to decide what was the appropriate punishment. Now, based on what he was convicted of, obviously the offense that he was found guilty of, there was a certain range that they were able to find, and that's how they came up with a number. Bowen, are you there?
Yep. I'm here. So
that's
when it comes to this, yeah, all good. We were working on something here.
On live TV.
No worries. So I did want to ask too, when it comes to the sentencing here and also the laws in Texas, does age play a factor here as well, as this crime did happen when he was 17?
So I think there's a couple of things here, Bowen. First of all, age obviously is a big factor. And I'm a little surprised. From what I understand, the only witness who testified in the sentencing for the defendant was his mother. I would have, knowing that this was a case that the defense would likely lose, and we talked about this just a couple of days ago, that it was a great case for the state, I would have thought they would have had somebody that could come in, probably an expert, a forensic psychologist, who could come in and explain to the jury why this is a defendant who shouldn't be sentenced to the maximum, why he shouldn't be sentenced to such a long amount of prison, because he's young, he's immature. Perhaps there's something in his history. Perhaps there'd been some abuse, something that the jury could hang their hat on. Just to have the mother there saying, look, this is my child, he's my boy, don't sentence him to the life or whatever it was. I'm just wondering, what happened? What was in the defense attorney's mind here, knowing they probably lose the case? It didn't seem like there was a whole lot of preparation for the sentencing. And I don't like to second guess another lawyer, but knowing that this was a tough case to win, I would have had that all ready to go. And it didn't seem like they did.
And are they going to be looking for an appeals process now? This is something that comes up a lot right now when we're talking about this case. What could that potentially look like? Is that a move that the defense could possibly move to next?
Yeah, and we talked about this a couple of days ago, right? And I said the two areas where there could be a potential appeal are, one, jury selection, or as I called it, jury elimination. And the second thing was the jury instructions. Now, from my understanding, the judge refused to give an instruction on criminally negligent homicide, which would have been a lesser offense. Now, typically, judges don't want to give additional jury instructions unless there's evidence to support it. Now, if I'm the prosecutor, I'm saying to myself, we have a great case here. The facts are on our side. Why not ask the judge to give that instruction? Because it could be that an appellate court looks at this and says, the trial court got it wrong. They should have given this additional instruction. So I think there's two main errors here, potentially for an appellate court to look at. I don't know what evidentiary rulings the trial judge made during the trial, but obviously those will be attacked. And I think ultimately there'll probably be a claim made against the defense attorney for ineffective assistance to counsel. When I was prosecutor, I testified in one of those hearings. I also represented a defendant where there was an allegation that the defense attorney did not, provide an effective defense for the client. So I think that's going to come down the pipe as well. I mean, you've got a young man here who's facing potentially 35 years in prison. So they're going to do everything they can to try and get this conviction reversed. And unfortunately, when you are a defense lawyer, sometimes the finger gets pointed at you, and I think it's going to happen in this case. There's nothing to lose. Why wouldn't you?
And if this does happen, how long does this time process look like for an appeals? And does Karmelo Anthony remain in prison during this time if they were to start that appeals process?
Yeah, he's going to sit there. My understanding is that in Texas, you get convicted of murder, you do not have a right to some type of appellate bond. So he's going to stay there. An interesting comment by the district attorney was, how the family got justice, and perhaps for that one day they did. But this case is not over. This could take 2, 3, 4 years to go through the court system. You've got an appellate court that's going to look at this. I don't know if there'll be some type of appeal to the Texas Supreme Court. There's going to be a claim probably made against the defense attorney for ineffective assistance of counsel. And if there's a reversal, this case is going to get retried probably. So I don't see this being over for several years. And unfortunately for the Metcalf family, they're going to have to live with this for quite a significant period of time, which is a shame. It is, but this is the way our justice system is set up. And you have a young man who's also been convicted of murder, and he wants to have his case potentially reheard.
And to have a case like this that's reheard, how do you reselect jury members for that, as this has garnered nationwide attention? Everybody knows about this case. How do you select jurors that would have no really prerequisite knowledge to this case?
Yeah, that's going to be a problem for the defense. They may say to the trial judge, you know what, Your Honor, we can't get a fair hearing in this county anymore. Can we move it? We'd like to have a hearing, have this heard in a different county where there wasn't so much publicity. So, Pandora's box has really been opened. And that's what happens in a murder case, especially one like this, where you've got two young people. You've got a victim who's deceased. You've got a young defendant who's facing a long, long prison sentence. So this is going to go on, and it's going to be interesting to watch it. But my heart breaks for both families, because they're both losing a son, but especially the Metcalf family, because they're not getting any closure anytime soon.
And as we watch that process likely play out, when we're talking about the appellates as well, how long could that even take when you talk about how long an appellate court even hearing takes, or how long it takes, that whole process?
Yeah, I mean, this could go on for a year and a half, potentially. Does the appellate court want to have oral argument, right? Sometimes the court says, okay, we've read the briefs. Now I want lawyers to come in and argue the case. And so this could drag on for a little bit. And we may have to bring in another lawyer to do the appeal.
And there's also speculation online of the Metcalf family pursuing a possible civil suit. Is that something that could be pursued? This is just online speculation that we're hearing through social media such as X.
It's possible. I mean, when there's a civil suit, it's not like the OJ case where there was a pot of gold potentially at the end of the rainbow. I don't think there is in this case. But what's interesting about filing a civil suit is they could potentially look to put the defendant on the stand and take his deposition. Now, I'm sure the defense counsel is going to object to that, but that's one of the reasons to file a civil case. You can find out what's really going on in the case. So do I think it could happen? It might. Do I think it gives them any more closure? Probably not, but they may do it anyway.
And then I was curious about the process that we saw play out in the courtroom as well. If I have this right, the sentencing, or the family of Austin Metcalf, spoke after the sentencing. In some of my experiences, I've seen families speak before the sentencing, as that could possibly weigh punishment. Can you tell us how that works in Texas there?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like in that case, because the defendant was found guilty, now the defendant's family gets to plead their case to the jury. First of all, the burden sort of shifts to them to say, please don't sentence us, to this amount of time. But also, the victim's family has a right to be heard. Even in Florida, where I practice, our Constitution provides for a victim's family and a victim, if it's not a murder case, to be heard. And so they had a right to be heard and tell the judge, this has destroyed our family, and it has destroyed their family, and you should give him the maximum, right? Or to the jury in this case, who are making the sentencing decision. But whoever's making the decision, the victim's family wants to be heard, and they have a right to be heard.
And while we've been monitoring this case, there's been a lot of protests outside that courthouse. We've seen some pretty really high emotions flaring during, especially when the sentencing came down. In your legal expertise, what makes this case really stand out across the United States, as we see murder cases happening all the time? What really stood out to you about this one?
Well, look, you had a white victim and a black defendant. And unfortunately, race has become a very sort of hot button topic throughout the country. And I think, what we're seeing here is just a sort of microcosm of what's potentially going on in the country, which is a shame. It really is. But part of it was caused by the fact we had an all-white jury. And I said to you when we spoke a few days ago, I was a little surprised the prosecutor would do that, especially knowing what was going on outside the courthouse and that it could potentially, be that get out of jail free card on an appeal. So here we are. I mean, it's a shame, and this is going to continue.
Mark, I want to give you the final word here. Are there any other last points or final thoughts that you had about this case and what we can make sure we keep an eye on as this continues to develop?
Well, I mean, obviously, we want to watch the appellate procedure, see what happens with that. Let's see if there's a civil case filed. I think that's interesting, and let's see what kind of claims made against the lawyer who represented the defendant. What's interesting is my understanding is the defendant did not testify, and as a defense lawyer, you rarely want to put your own client on to be subjected to cross-examination. But if they were going to make a self-defense case, it may have been necessary for the defendant to testify. I mean, was there any prior interaction between these two individuals? Did Austin Metcalf, did he have a reputation in the community for being an aggressive individual? And we don't know any of these things, but I would have wanted to know that as a defense attorney, because that would have led into was the actions of the defendant reasonable? Because that's really what the whole self-defense case was about, the reasonableness of his actions. And if there's no background to substantiate that, how do you argue, well, I took a knife to a fist fight, but I should be excused? And I'm just wondering what the defense attorney knew or didn't know or should have known. And that may lead into this claim that, he didn't live up to the standard of care that he should have done for his client. He didn't do his homework. We'll have to wait and see what happens, but this is not over, Bowen.
And we'll make sure we stay on top of it. Mark Astor, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate you coming on here and breaking it all down for us.
Good to see you again, my friend. Take care.
Thank you. You as well.